Shalom. I am here with Ryan, and this is the first time I've actually talked to Ryan, but Ryan is on my Discord server, and we had a pretty challenging discussion on being a Noahide. And Ryan gave a beautiful answer, which made me think this is the type of guy I want to have on my channel. So here he is. Um, so, Ryan, tell us who you are and how you came to be a Noahide and what a Noahide is, and because I'm guessing a lot of people don't know. And then I'll get to destroy you with facts and logic.
Looking forward to getting destroyed with facts and logic. Um, so I'm Ryan. I'm from Australia. I'm from Canberra, specifically the capital. It's not as big a city as say Sydney or Melbourne, which most people might be familiar with. Um, I'm also a university student in my final year. I study Asian studies. So that I guess that's a little bit about me. And like you said, I'm a Noahide. And I guess one of the big issues is when I bring up I'm a Noahide and what do people think? What do people don't know anything about it? So simply a Noahide, I guess, is well, I guess it's not very simple, is it? Um, because there's multiple. I guess there's two ways of categorizing it, right? There were Noahides who are given the label they're a Noahide, and it's not a self-identification, right? So like Muslims and maybe Christians, depending on who you ask, and that's simply people who just intrinsically follow the seven Noahide laws in their religion. And then you get people like me who self-identify, which are people who are Gentiles who believe that Judaism is true, and so we follow the seven Noahide laws. And uh, there's a bit of debate about the community and practices, and it's sort of messy in that regard. It's still it's kind of new, I guess you could think of it, even though it's not new. It's new in the way that it doesn't seem like, or at least there hasn't been this amount of interest by Gentiles at least in a very long time, since probably around the time of Christ. So
Yeah, so
yeah, I
50
think
years ago, I mean, before I was born, a Gentile who believed in Judaism, basically, I mean, everybody would expect you to just convert to Judaism. And um, I would say 100 years ago or 150 years ago, like I can't imagine there being a movement of people who say we believe in the God of Israel, we believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we believe in Judaism, but we don't necessarily want to be part of the Jewish community. We want to have our own community. And that's really, I mean, yeah, so what you brought up there is really correct regarding for example, we would generally say that a believing Muslim, um, at least the beliefs of Islam fit into what in Judaism we would call being a Noahide religion. And Antonio, who's the other very prominent Noahide on the Discord, he when he first started believing in God, and he asked me, I told him, well, why don't you check out Islam first? Because I can't recommend Trinitarian Christianity. I did recommend Unitarian Christianity and put him in touch with Sam, but for the exact same reasons that you actually on the Discord said so clearly, um, and I'll let you actually say what you said, but he was like, no, I can't pretend to be a Christian or a Muslim. And he personally didn't see why he should convert to become Jewish. And I mean, I certainly agree that there's nothing, if he were to try to convert, the rabbi would try to dissuade him, right? And it's not like a lot of people don't understand why we would try to dissuade someone from converting to Judaism if they believe in Judaism. And it's like, it's even funny because I would say, like, really, your religion is Judaism, it's Orthodox Judaism, but you're not a Jew, and that's the weird place you're in. So, yeah, I'll let you talk now.
Yeah. So what I said in the Discord was that you're in a tricky position if you come to the belief that Christianity is false, and you can't see it. And you might see this a lot, particularly in uh, part of the growing Noahide movement online, which tends to be quite polemical against Christianity. Um, I won't name names, but they definitely do exist. And I guess like partly because of this is like rabbis like Tobias Singer, for instance, um, kind of gives them a little encouragement. And to be fair, it is important that people have these type of dialogues. So I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but just that like they exist, and it's part of the online sphere of Noahides that exists. But also, we find like personally, I find it I couldn't believe in Islam either, and I did look at it, and just like you said, to Antonio to look into Islam, I did the same thing because when you hear, sometimes you might hear testimony of Muslims, like I did on, I was listening to the Dean show once, and they had somebody on who was in the same predicament. He saw that Christianity was false, and um, he had to choose looking into Judaism and Islam, and he said, "Oh no, I can't." I immediately crossed out Judaism because like I don't want to be a Jew, and like Noahide, it's just like not even it's not worth it. So I'm just going to convert to Islam. And so, like I understand that from that perspective, but I looked into it and I couldn't become a Muslim. I just found the evidence to be too strongly against the Quran. So that's why I'm not a Muslim. Um, and so, yeah, we're in this nice predicament between don't want to be a Christian, don't want to be a Muslim, and Judaism is a religion where everyone seems to think that it's an exclusive club, that the Jews aren't interested in Gentiles. They couldn't care less about Gentiles. And you hear that a lot, actually, from people, even people who proclaim to have looked into Judaism and rejected Noahidism or to become a Jew. They'll say, they'll repeat the same thing. And I found that when you actually look into it, there is there is some reason why I'm gonna say it. Like, I'm not gonna say that it's not like what open arms accepted like Christianity or whatever. But to say that Gentiles aren't welcome in Judaism, I think is just not true at all. And I've had a lot of good experiences with Jews, because I guess part of the reason is right, like especially in the last 40, 50 years, is well, I guess since the 70s, really, the encroachment of places like Jews for Jesus and all that kind of stuff that have made Jewish communities even more hesitant to just accept Gentiles into their community, um, afraid of people pulling tricks, and you do see that online, and like, again, some of the Noahide community will also post it, and people like Toby Singer will also post videos and stuff about fake rabbis pretending to be pretending to be rabbis to convert people to Christianity and stuff like that. So I can understand that sort of um, the weariness to just be accepting any old guy in the community.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it, I have to say, is a failure within the Jewish community, and one thing I keep on saying is a failure of Jews to be true to Judaism isn't surprising. wherever you go, you will find that all the people there are human beings, and that's going to be very disappointing. And uh, this is there are definitely ways I think in which, and Yosef and Chezi and I and Rabbi Malat and lots of other people have discussed the failure of the Jewish community, and there are, I could give excuses, right, um, for why, 2,000 years ago, it's estimated that at least in some synagogues, as many as half of the attendees, like regular attendees, like people who were actually members and, were actually, for example, donating things, and their names were on like plaques and stuff, they were not Jewish at all. And um, that's a background in Christianity that, like, only some people really understand when they're reading the Christian Bible. Um, but that really did exist. And so today, unfortunately, I have to say, I don't think, I think very, very few Jewish communities are as open and um, welcoming to Noahides as they should be. And like, I can give you excuses, but I don't think I should give you excuses, because I think that it is a failure. It is a failure in the Jewish community not to properly support the Noahide community. And as the number of Noahides has gone up, I actually think the Orthodox Jewish community has started to step up. Now, part of the reason, like, Tovia Singer is so popular among Noahides is precisely what you said, which is the fact that a lot of, well, Jews for Jesus actually backfired in a huge way. And so they created all these churches which look like synagogues, which they were hoping would attract a lot of Jews. And what they actually did was they attracted a bunch of Christians who started learning more about Judaism. And from that, there started being the Hebrew roots and the Messianic Jews, and they started taking Judaism more seriously. And then you ended up with, there may be as many as 100,000, possibly more Noahides out there today. And um, there's only at around maybe a million religious Orthodox Jews. There's maybe 12 to 14 million or Jews, right? Lowercase Orthodox Jews, and most of those are not religious. And if they are religious, they're not capital O Orthodox. And here you are, a part of a capital O Orthodox Jewish community that's not Jewish. So, how did you find yourself in this community? Like, how'd you grow up? What made you this move away from Christianity? How do your friends and family feel about this? What's your journey been like? Who is this Ryan guy on my channel?
That's a good question. So, I grew up Catholic. Um, I grew up in the Catholic Church. Did the whole shebang. I was baptized, confirmed, all that when I was still in primary school. Went to church every week. Um, and then so I went to Catholic schools, private schools, my entire life. In high school, I had my atheist phase. I think a lot of people go through that. Especially when I was growing up, it was kind of the height of the new atheist movement. Um, so 20 around the well, towards the end of I should say, the height of the new atheist movement, but it was definitely still very popular online. So really my journey starts when I was 16 or so. Um, and I was having, I guess you could call them like existential crises, which is really weird to have as a 16-year-old, but it happened.
No, no, actually, a 16-year-old man, especially I think in today's world, and especially in the weird countries, what is it? Western educated something something, rich developed countries. I think especially young men are not given a lot of um, no, the existential crisis. I'm surprised that you had such a strong Catholic background and you still had it, because so the Catholics, at least there's like the Jesuits, and there's all like there's a very rich intellectual background, and I'm sure
Hmm.
Father Eric, if he's watching, is like going, "No, we lost him." So how did that happen?
Okay, so um, yeah, I didn't know about this deep intellectual tradition in Catholicism until after. When I was at school, we didn't really learn much about that. We did like it was. It's interesting now that I think about it because reflecting on it, it seemed very like perhaps Catholics don't like this, but it seemed very Protestant. Um, there was like there was a bit of we did learn about a little bit about Black Jews and all that kind of stuff, but and a little bit of church history, but it was nothing. We usually just focus on the catechism. I mean, and that's not Protestant at all, but that was in the later part of my education, and that really like doesn't keep people um, attracted to it, since we weren't really learning about the fundamentals of the faith. It was really just like going through the catechism. But anyway, after I um, when I was at towards the end of my atheist phase, and experiencing these existential crises, I um, decided to look into the kind of like evidence for God. And I didn't, to be fair, I didn't really choose to look into it. It just kind of came up. Ironically enough, well, I guess you should say, like, I guess this is foreshadowing. The first video I ever watched on it was actually of a rabbi, and he was giving it was a very short video. I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes, and he was talking about the Big Bang and how that like is like a reason to believe in God. And that was the first video I ever watched. And of course, because the internet is the internet, you kind of get thrown into Christian apologetics very early on, right? So if you're ever looking into these questions, pretty much the first thing that will come up is Christian apologetics. And so I got really stuck into the philosophy and all that kind of stuff, reading all basically Christians, um, until I think about after a year or so, I decided that I think the argument's really good, and I believe in God now. So I did that, and I was like, okay, so I guess the next logical step is everyone's been talking about this, about Jesus. Maybe I should go with that direction. So I did, and I read lots about Christian apologetics in this regard, like Jesus' burial, the historicity of the Gospels, all that kind of stuff. Um, and I did that for about probably like 6 months or so. And so this is getting around just around the time of the pandemic era, just before. And I'm just going to university as well, the one I'm currently at. And I was going through all that, and I was thinking, and I've been pretty well convinced at this point. And I was thinking, like, you know what? Like, I'm probably going to become a Christian and go back to the Catholic faith, right? Because that's what I grew up. I couldn't really see, like, I didn't know anything about about Protestantism. I've never even been to a Protestant church. I have no idea really until I got onto the internet. I had no idea about Protestantism, which it's kind of funny now that most Christians I know are Protestants. Um, but I decided, perhaps out of whim, perhaps it was, God, I don't know, but I decided to see if there were other people and like no, because obviously when you're in Christian apologetics, the only thing you focus mostly on is atheists, and I already thought that the atheists were wrong, so I wasn't interested in the into the atheist debate. But before I decided to jump head into Christianity, which, like I said, I was pretty well convinced of at this point. I decided to look at what other people had to say, and so I was like, you know what, the Jews don't believe in Jesus. And I'm like, that's curious. Maybe what are their reasons for it? And I thought, there's not going to be any good reasons. Honestly, I didn't think there were going to be any good reasons. Um, and honestly, I didn't expect to find anything. I expected there to be nothing. I expected to just Google it, in my case, YouTube it, and not see anything, and just see Christians talking about it. And I didn't expect to see any Jews. And the first thing that popped up was, of course, Jews for Judaism with Rabbi Skobac
I
from
love
Canada.
Rabbi Stovak. Yeah.
Yeah, and I listened to him talk, and I was like, what the heck? Where has this been? Like, I was really shocked. I was, honestly, I was very shocked because I thought things like Isaiah 53 and his prophecies were like locked in stone. Like, I listened to like Frank Turek and like Michael Heiser talk about Isaiah 53, and I thought it was like in the bag. And yeah, and then I listened to Rabbi Skobac and talk about it, and I was like, this man knows what he's talking about, and this is a serious challenge to to Christianity. So I went down that route, watching a lot of their videos, reading their blogs. Um, of course, I came across Tobias Singer, but my story with Tobias Singer is not like other people's stories. I didn't find Tobias Singer on Tobias Singer's own website, on his own YouTube channel. I actually found him through a Muslim, which is like very strange to me, that I'd never heard of him or anything until I was watching a Muslim channel, which maybe you know of. His name's Blogging Theology. Um, he's
I sounds vaguely familiar, but Tovia Singer is popular among Muslims. It's funny. He speaks like a Baptist preacher, not so much like a rabbi, and he's very fire and brimstone against Christianity, which the Muslims love. And so he actually, it's funny, he was the only real Orthodox rabbi, so he called himself the chief rabbi. He was the only Orthodox rabbi in Malaysia for a while, and he knows Islam well enough, and he had very good relationships with the Muslim community in Malaysia, and so he's very popular among Muslims, and he's actually more popular among Muslims and even Christians than he is among Jews. Like, I will see memes of him on like Bridges of Meaning or other Christian air like places, and very few even Orthodox Jews have heard of him. And as far as like Reform and conservative Jews, like, they have no clue he even exists.
That's really interesting, because I think he's probably the most popular rabbi online. I like, at least that's the way it appears to me.
He's the most popular rabbi among Noahides for sure, and maybe among Christians. In the apologetics, Rabbi Emmanuel Shochat, if you haven't seen his stuff, it's a little bit older. He passed away a few years ago. He was very involved in the Noahide movement when he was alive. The Rebbe actually kind of appointed him as the Rebbe's shliach, the Rebbe's official emissary to the Noahide movement. But unfortunately, Rabbi Shochat, I did get to meet him. He was actually, so my rabbi, my is his nephew, and so I did get to meet Rabbi Shochat. Rabbi Shochat's brother is a very, very prominent rabbi here in Los Angeles. Um, and he has, like, there's old stuff on YouTube from Rabbi Shochat, Emmanuel Shochat. You I would certainly check him out because he's kind of the same polemic, like fire and brimstone that Tovia Singer is, but he also does it from a, like, with Talmudic precision. I miss Rabbi Shochat so much. So yeah, but that's, you know, now we're rating internet rabbis, and the fact is
Yeah.
there are very few there are very few actually prominent rabbis who are available on the internet at all. Rabbi Malot, who's actually listening, and has been he's on Tanakh Talk, and he's been trying to be more active on my Discord and on my channel. He is great guy, but honestly, like, there are I don't know any rabbis that are well known within Orthodox Judaism that are maybe Rabbi Shirky. He's I guess a little bit better known in the Zionist circles, which is not my circles. But there are Manis Friedman is kind of well known in online, and he is a genuinely well known rabbi. But again, it's like the skills don't really translate because the rabbis who are very well respected within Orthodox Judaism, uh, Rabbi Malat says hi. Um, the who are very, very well respected within Orthodox Judaism rarely give speeches in English, and certainly don't spend a lot of time talking about Christianity and Jesus and stuff like that. So yeah, unfortunately, there are very few rabbis that are considered very high caliber rabbis that also um, also are involved in the Noahide movement. That's part of the reason why I've been so much trying to get Rabbi Malot more involved. He's one of the higher caliber rabbis that are available in this corner of the internet.
Yeah, so like Tobias Singer is like I definitely watched him early on, and not on his own channel but on Tanakh Talk, which I think is I'm like I know William doesn't have that many subscribers, but I think he's the most popular Noahide YouTube channel.
I think so
Um,
too. I'm surprised his channel is not does not have more subscribers. I think a lot of people hate watch him and refuse to subscribe.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I still watch Tanakh Talk, and I've been watching them for I'd say like ooh, 2 years at this point. And I really enjoy Tanakh Talk and his uh, some of the streams with Rabbi Skrobak and all that. It's good fun. But uh, where was I? Yeah. So when I was in the when I found about Jews for Judaism and Tovia Singer and all that kind of stuff, I did think they had very good arguments that counted a lot of the Christian claims. Um, and I'm like we could get into specifics, but I don't know if it is exactly you know
Well, what was the big thing for you that made you think I can't be a Christian anymore?
okay. So I think the big thing for me was well I that's the thing because there are like many sort of aspects. I guess I'll list two. So the two big ones was the Trinity, which I found to be just I looked at a lot of different models from like Swinburne social theory to Craig's Trinitarian monotheism, monarchical Trinitarianism, and I didn't find any of these to be very successful. Um, and the second one would be um, probably uh, the realization that I had that the Tanakh doesn't contain um, Jesus or the Trinity in it, and that you can read if you were to use so if you were to use a Jewish reading, which because of course there's many like depending on who you ask, there's lots of different readings, but you don't like seeing Jesus and the Holy Spirit with the Father in a Trinitarian way. I don't think is really tenable in the Tanakh. And there's multiple different angles you could take that. So at first I was taking it from a very orthodox Jewish route, which I still think is very good. But also when you combine that with ancient Near Eastern thought, right? So like maybe if you read like Amy Jill Levine and like Mark, what's his name? Mark Zwei, I think his name is. These Jewish scholars, they're not. I don't think they're orthodox, or at least I
Yeah,
don't.
I'm not. I mean, Yosef, Rabbi Joe, I call him. He's not an actual rabbi. Now that we actually have a real rabbi, Rabbi Malott, uh, but Yosef was our rabbi until Rabbi Malott and Chezi showed up. And Yosef knows a lot more about the academic study of the ancient Near East than I ever did. And frankly, the only reason I have learned all of this stuff about the ancient Near East is because of trying to understand Christianity. So yeah, I don't recognize these names, but I mean, ultimately, part of the problem I think is a lot of Christians imagine that Judaism kind of stopped with Jesus and the destruction of the Second Temple, or that it was somehow, I did you watch my discussion with Father Stephen DeYoung?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was serious when I said he had his dates off by 1,000 years, and I couldn't tell which way when he said rabbinic Judaism started at around the year 500. And I think that's a very Christian way of looking at rabbinic Judaism, and a hopeful way for them to try to understand it. And it's like, no, rabbinic Judaism, I mean, you could argue it started with the destruction of the first temple, because that's when the that's when it became necessary to have the synagogue services, and the prophetic tradition that Isaiah and all that is. Or you can even talk about, so the most recent really time when Judaism was completely united, um, as in pretty much all the Jews who are still Jewish today descend from people who accepted the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Code of Jewish Law, which was written about 500 years ago. So you can make an argument that like Judaism, rabbinic Judaism was, if you don't accept that it was founded on Mount Sinai by God, which I do, you can make an argument that it was founded by the prophets after the destruction of the first temple, or you can say that it kind of crystallized into what it is with the Shulchan Aruch and the Arizal about 500 years ago in Tzfat, right, Israel. And because basically every Jewish community that exists today, with very tiny exceptions, are the remnants of communities which accepted those teachings. But the idea most Christians have, which is, oh, the second temple was destroyed, and then Judaism formed out of the Talmud and the Mishnah. It's just really, really wrong. And the way you see how wrong it is by learning the New Testament, right? It when you look at the Christian Bible, you see very, very clearly that rabbinic Judaism was alive during the life of Jesus and Paul. So the idea that it only was created after the destruction of the Second Temple, it just falls apart if you know your Christian Bible. And that's the funny part. Like, the rabbis who get tripped up in their arguments with Protestants are the ones who don't actually know their Christian Bible, because the best way to destroy these arguments that Christians make is with their own Bible, not our stuff.
Yeah, that's the other interesting thing that I think really spoke to me as well. I bought Rabbi Stuart Federer's book. Now I know there's a bit of controversy about him because I don't think
Well,
he's an Orthodox rabbi.
Yeah, so he's a reform. He was ordained reform, but I think it kind of seems like he's moved into orthodoxy, even though his beginning was from reform. So I've never actually heard him preach anything but Orthodox Judaism, and he's definitely more observant than I am, since I'm not very observant at all. But so, I mean, I can't call myself an Orthodox Jew and not call Rabbi Federer an Orthodox Jew. But when he got his rabbinic ordination, and the synagogues he used to work for, I don't know if he's still with Reform, but his rabbinic ordination was from HUC, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so I bought Rabbi Stuart Federer's book, Judaism and Christianity: A Contrast. And I know there'll be people like, some of the Christian friends that might be listening might shake their heads a bit, but if they've read it. But what was really eye-opening for me in his book, and I think this is also something that it connects this, is the idea that a lot of Christians have mistakenly, and Christians who are educated don't really fall into this, that Jews had nothing after the temple was destroyed, right? That like the religion had to change fundamentally because of the destruction of the second temple, which just like the initial question should be, but the first temple got destroyed and there was no temple for 70 years, and like it's in the Bible. Like I don't, it's that's sort of like the kind of confusing part, because you can't leverage that, considering that in the Bible there wasn't a temple for a period. So that became like it. So that kind of opened up my eyes to seeing that there's a whole nother level there where the temple, because that's what you kind of get into when you're in Christianity. There's a lot of focus around the destruction of the second temple, mainly because Jesus prophesied it, or like it was just such a climactic event that in Jewish history. So when you learn that things like in Ezekiel 18, when God says that He wishes that the righteous live and repent, right? This is like it really does strike at the heart about what Judaism offers, which is different from Christianity, right? Like Christianity wants to offer you, like as Protestants might, evangelical Protestants will call, like the free gift from God, right? And you just need to accept salvation, and that is a very different message from what Judaism offers, and Judaism is saying that you need to repent. You need to turn back to God. Like, you don't have. There's no, like, for example, when you're listening to other rabbis like Skoback or Tobias Singer, they'll ask the question like, "What is salvation? Like, what do you mean?" Right? Like this concept of like you're like in this state of default damnation isn't it's alien, right? Like it doesn't it's not found in the Tanakh. It's not found in the Torah. So they ask like salvation from what? Like what physical thing is God trying to save you from? Because in my mind, like I've listened to a lot of different Christians, and um, for example, Rob from Sentinel Apologetics. I love the dude. He's from Western Australia. He's a great dude. He's incredibly intelligent. Um, and in one of his streams, he says like he asked when he's talking about his conversion to Christianity, he say like, what about the problem of death, right? And he'll say like, um, you know, like what does God do to solve the problem of death? And I'm like, well, it's not a problem, right? Like he created it. Right? How is it a problem? Right? Death isn't a problem. It's not. Like it's a part of nature. It's a part of the world that God has created. So these types of questions about like the fall of man, which I know like isn't really. It depends on who you ask because like Orthodox don't hold to the same sort of position as say Catholics do or Protestants do on this issue, and they can get complicated in that regard. But when you're looking at the the kind of like foundational views to Christianity in this particular sense about issues of salvation, which is always an issue because this is pretty much the reason why people evangelize for the most part. Because yes, you could argue there's the element of like truth, and this is what like universalists will argue like, well, shouldn't people just know the truth? Therefore, we should go out and evangelize. Um, but there is that sort of understanding here that the world is a much bigger and a much more complicated place than I feel like Christianity really addresses, and that's why I have to have a lot of these and they have to go into a lot of theological depth into things like what about people who didn't hear about Jesus? What about you know uh, these types of things? And they're kind of like annihilation. Is annihilation taught in the Bible? Is universalism? Is eternal conscious torment? There's a lot of questions. It doesn't seem like very clearly laid out, and especially for something which is supposed to be so important. Um, and you could, and I have, and I think this is where the issue with Noahide comes in, right? Because people might ask, like, well, Judaism is just a religion about Jews. I don't, like, it doesn't matter. Like, the Goyim, the Gentiles, like, who care? Like, they don't care about them. But if you read the Tanakh, that's just not true. Like, God has a very, very big interest in the Gentiles, and like, yes, I understand that in Judaism there is a history before the scholars of thinking of Jonah um, as not necessarily being very historical, and same with Jonah, right? And these are two um, prominent.
I mean, there are definitely like secular scholars who will say that Job and Jonah and Daniel are forgeries and were written later, but honestly, I mean, if you're going to believe that, then you still are going to end up rejecting Christianity. And this is one of the things that people think is unfair. They say to me, well, you won't accept my criticisms of these secular criticisms of the Hebrew Bible. Why will you accept them of the Christian Bible? And first of all, I have to say the Christian Bible is of an obviously lower quality than the Hebrew Bible. There's no question about that to me. But it's a bad argument because look, you can argue Judaism is false. And if Judaism is false, Christianity is false.
Mm-hmm.
because Christianity does rely at the very least on the Tanakh, right? So if the Jewish Bible is false, then the Christian Bible is certainly false, right? Because
Yeah.
it's an outgrowth of the Jewish Bible. So if you're going to tell me that like Jonah and Job and Daniel, that these are later inventions and they're not true, like that isn't an argument for Christianity. That's an argument for not being a Jew or a Christian.
Yeah, and I agree. And yeah, so the Tanakh definitely does care about Gentiles. I mean, I believe Jonah, the whole book of Jonah, is read on Rosh Hashanah, if I'm not mistaken.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, that's it. And then the book of Job is a Gentile. Like there's no, he's not a Jew. It's very clear. And the so at that point you
It's
can't.
not even Nach. It's not even just Nach. I mean, when you read the Torah, right, you have like Moses, his father-in-law, right, was a Gentile. The only chapter in the entirety of Torah which is named for a human being is Yitro, which is named after Moses' son, what you call it, father-in-law Jethro, who was a Gentile, and whether or not he converted, like, but this idea, like, there are a lot of Gentiles throughout the Jewish Bible, and the idea that Judaism is an ethnic religion is something a lot of people believe, but it's easily refuted by actually just reading the Torah, much less the rest of the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, Christianity wouldn't have arisen among Gentiles if it wasn't if there wasn't something there that spoke to Gentiles. So
Yeah.
like that argument doesn't work. And like you said, they now believe that some synagogues and had up to maybe half the audience, half the practitioners being Gentiles. So there's that history that's kind of been forgotten along with it, which is very unfortunate in the mind in that regard. And like you said, it's not as easy. Like yes, from an outsider's perspective, it can be easy to just judge everything. Like it's because they're insular, they're not like all these other things that they're definitely a part of it. And I'm not gonna sit here and necessarily like I'll let other people find the faults within the Jewish community. I don't feel like I'm exactly the kind of person to be pointing fingers. So
Well, okay, I have to say on your behalf, I think the Jewish community has in fact not stepped up where we should for the Noahides, but that's a whole other discussion. But for you personally, okay, so now you're believing that Judaism is true. Why don't you just convert and be a Jew?
that is the question that I always get whenever I bring up I'm a Noahide. People are like, "Oh, what's that?" And I say it's all about Judaism. And I say, "Why are you converting?" Right? Or like, "Why don't you become a Jew?" And that's a good question, and it's a difficult question because part of it is that it's a very multifaceted question because becoming a Jew is a it's more than just converting to a religion, and that is part of the problem that I think people have. Like when they say like it's an ethnic religion, it's because of that part of it. But it's it's not it's not that. It's because becoming a Jew means becoming part of a community and becoming like a full member of a community. which is different because it's not just a community based on what you believe, right? Like, it's not like Christianity or Islam where, like, if you're in the community, you're only there because you believe the same things, and once you don't believe the same things, you're out, right? And that that is why heretics play such a massive role in Christianity and Islam, comparative to Judaism. I'm not saying there aren't heretics in Judaism, but
There
it's
are
not
definitely heretics in Judaism, but we love our heretics. So
exactly exactly. You don't hear that from Christians. I never heard a Christian say I love their heretics. So like that is a big part of why it can be difficult for someone to really take the leap and convert to Judaism. Like so, in my specific circumstances, in the city where I live, there are only two synagogues, and one of them is a Chabad synagogue, but the rabbi doesn't live here. He actually lives in Melbourne, which is 6 hours away, and so he's not here very often. And I don't live near the synagogue, that's for sure. And it's housing prices are very expensive here. There's a lot of like reasons why, like in that sort of practical reason why it can be difficult to move. The other reason is like personally, my I don't know about other people, but personally, my life has taken a direction before I even was interested in religion. Where I'm moving to South Korea this year, so for work. So there's that kind of part of my life, and of course the Jewish community in South Korea. I can't imagine how big that is. Probably
well,
non-existent.
okay. So funniest thing, do you know what the second most well sold book after the Bible is in South Korea? I'm gonna have to send you this article because I couldn't believe it either. So somebody in Japan decided to make an abridged version of the Talmud and just print it as the Talmud in Japan, and then it got translated to Korean, and it is one of the most popular books in South Korea. Is this abridged Talmud that like basically every home has one because it's like, oh, well, Jewish wisdom, right? So like you have a Bible and here's our Talmud, and it's like a single volume. It's not even close anywhere close to being a full set of Talmud. A full set of Talmud is like an
Mm.
encyclopedia set. But it is the most well so you can walk into almost any bookstore in South Korea and get this Korean translation of an abridged Talmud.
That does not surprise me at all. That's a very Korean thing. I'm not gonna lie. Um, yeah. So yeah, that also plays a part in it. That my life circumstances have taken me in a direction where in my life I don't see um, really the possibility of converting to Judaism. Um, and that is like it's difficult in one sense because human beings want that connection with community and religion, and Judaism is a very has a lot of beautiful traditions, a lot of beautiful celebrations, and it is a shame to miss out on one of that. And as a Gentile, you can still participate in many of these. Like if you have friends and like like if you've watched especially like some of the videos online about I forget who it is the guy who went to he was invited a lot to Hasidic um like
Oh yeah,
gatherings
that's
and like
Santinelli, Peter Santinelli, I think his name thing is. Yeah, yeah, I loved that. And the Jewish community has started being a lot more open to and aware. Like I've had to explain what Noahides are to my family, and they're like, a lot of them are like, "What's going on here?" But and this is one of the things that came up on the Discord server. There's one particular member of the Discord server who he was raised Jewish, but he was raised in a non-Orthodox community, and his mother had converted not Orthodox. So he's not considered Jewish by Orthodox Judaism, and he's fallen completely out of love with Reform and conservative Judaism, and he doesn't believe in Christianity, he doesn't believe in Islam, and in order to become an Orthodox Jew, right, he would have to move to within walking distance and short walking distance. Like they're not going to let you walk like a rabbinic court. In order to convert you, one of their requirements is you have to live in a within a short walking distance of a an observant Jewish community, and you have to become part of that community. And you know, uh, yeah, once you convert, you are part of our community. And it's funny. I've been talking to somebody else who was told that he was converted Orthodox, but it doesn't appear that that was true. And so he thought he was Jewish, and he, I had to tell him, I'm from everything you're telling me, you're not, you were never converted as an into Orthodox Judaism. And it's a difficult thing, but when it comes to being a Noahide, like I'm guessing there's no Noahide synagogue anywhere near you. Like, what do you do as well? I do want to know what your family and friends say about this. Like, have you told them? Have you discussed it with them? What's their reaction been?
Yeah, so I haven't told my parents yet, mostly because um, they're pretty atheist.
Okay.
So I haven't
You're
gone around to like,
you're more worried they will be worried that that you believe in God more than this weird religion.
yeah, yeah. My mom is a school teacher, and she's a primary school teacher at a Catholic school, but she only converted to Catholicism so she could teach. So I mean, I'm not like I don't think they're gonna. I don't think they're worried about that at all. My friends
So
though, which I have,
nobody send his parents a copy of this video, okay? That's not cool, people.
yeah. So I think with so that, yeah, with so my brother does know, and he doesn't really. He's not a Christian. He just sort of believes in God, and that's kind of it. So he just doesn't. I told him about it, and he was like, "Yeah, cool," kind of like whatever. Um, and my friends, well, one of my friends is a Muslim, and well, I should say like my best friend's a Muslim, and he converted to Islam. And to be honest, he's like, yeah, he doesn't really care either. So I've never really had any pushback, to be honest, from my personal life.
Okay.
At least not yet. And for the most part, I haven't really like, because I didn't like, despite growing up Catholic and being put in this Catholic position, I like, no one I know is actually very Christian, and so I've never had any sort of like, oh, you're going to hell or any of that. So from that perspective, it's been fine. Like, nothing's really that big a deal. I mean, this is also like, Australia's not as, I guess Australia's a lot like Europe. It's a lot less like America in that there's far fewer confessional Christians here. Despite, you might see statistics say that, we're all like 70% Christian or whatever. It's the same thing in Europe. It's just cultural Christianity. So yeah, so from that perspective, you don't really get, and I don't know, like, obviously, like, you can't tell in Noahide. I don't have any like jewelry or anything that would indicate that I'm anything other than like an average person. So like, yeah, it's never been brought up. People tend not to talk about religion here. So yeah, in that regard, I have had no pushback, most at all in my personal life. From the internet, though, that is where most of it comes from.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of, I think, the bitterness that's in the ex-Christian Noahide community actually comes because so many of those people have had to forcefully um, tell people that they no longer believe in Jesus, and then been told that they're going to hell, and that, you know, they're betraying Jesus or betraying God. And so uh, I'm glad you haven't had that in your life. And yeah, I mean, on the internet, you know, yes, there is pushback, like there was on Discord, and you actually you handled it beautifully. But and I do want to get into some of the questions that people were asking, because I'm sure there are people screaming at the while watching this. Um, but have you have you gone to Chabad? Have you tried to be a like approached what Jewish community there is in Canberra? Because ultimately, you know, I think what I would love for there to be is a supportive community for you. And one of the questions, Antonio, he's been wanting to get married for a long time, and it's been very hard for him to find somebody to marry him. And what I mean, I have to call her his wife now because they're going to have a child, and they're living together. And I kind of feel guilty about that, because while it is allowable for a Noahide to get married simply by inviting his wife to live with him, um, it certainly is better to actually have a wedding first. And we are definitely going to do that for Antonio, and he's getting civil married and all that. But um, what about that, as far as dating and getting married, and you know a community and a support structure? What has have you been thinking about that, and has there been much support for you in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, so in my local area, I've been in contact with a rabbi there. Um I've been once, and that's because it's quite a distance from where I live.
Mm.
So it fairly hasn't been easy to get there. And it was it was nice. So I'm not gonna like I and my impressions was that I didn't get to meet everyone and all that kind of stuff, but they were welcoming. So I I didn't really have any because yeah, one of the things was that I didn't want to just obviously turn up with any no notice or anything like that. And since the rabbi is not there very often, I want to make sure that he knew I was coming and all that. So yeah, it definitely wasn't a bad experience. And maybe that's I couldn't like I said I've only been once, so I can't say whether that was because I'm a stranger and it's sort of like nice sort of like that type of thing. But because I was curious, asking questions like sort of the same things you're asking about Noahidism and all that. But as for like the kind of like support network, and like dating and marriage and all that kind of stuff, yes, there. As far as I'm aware, there's no like official, at least like officially recognized like um, kind of like concrete practices that all Noahides should do. So if you've like read, for example, Shimon Cohen's book, the Universal Ethical Laws, the Seven Noahide Laws. He doesn't really go into that. It's not a book it's more about like the main focus is really on the Noahide laws themselves, keeping observance of them, and um, like studying Torah, whether that's by yourself and using Jewish materials and these types of things, or with a rabbi, or with a community, or within the Noahide community. Um, that's really the main practice. Of course, there's also like specific prayers that have been like I guess you could say like written by certain rabbis and stuff that are like that people have
It's all very
deemed.
controversial. I have to tell you, like, the rabbis, yeah, what exactly constitutes Noahide prayers? How Noahides? Yeah, it's all controversial, even among the very few rabbis who are actually involved in it, which is, again, I would say unfair to you, because rabbis should, in fact, hammer out these halachot. Halacha is Jewish law, and the Jewish law should be clear enough that, so one of part of the discussion we were having was, um, somebody had, like, there are all these intricate halachic questions which rabbis have not weighed in on, and it's certainly not fair to expect you to try to figure this stuff out um, by yourself, especially, like, you have not spent many years studying halacha and Jewish law and stuff. So Rabbi Malot, but he's not what's called a rabbinic decisor. The rabbinic decisors have not gotten involved, and there are very few rabbis of who are considered decisors on YouTube at all. The only one who is an actual decisor that I know is active on YouTube in English is Rabbi Breitowitz, and I'm not sure if Rabbi Shulman is considered a posek or not. He's a Rav Moreh Horah. Rabbi Pinchas Levin, he is a Rav Moreh Horah. But and Rabbi Malot, I believe, is a Rav Moreh Horah. But yeah, I mean, how you would even know the difference between these rabbis, is you wouldn't. And so um, part I actually think, and Rabbi Malot agrees with me. Rabbi Breitowitz, he is definitely one of the top rabbis who is actively engaged in on YouTube in English. So yeah, uh, this is the article. I put the link in the thing. This is the article from the New Yorker, which here, let me actually pull it up because it is a funny article. Where do you go? How the Talmud became a bestseller in South Korea. It's from 2015. Um, I highly recommend it. It's actually a pretty funny article about the philo-Semitism in Korea. So, like, you're probably going to have a very interesting um, um you know you might be, should you care to be a leader in the Noahide community, which I think you're going to end up being. Um, should you care in Korea, actually South Korea specifically, you're probably, like, you're going somewhere where there is intense interest in Judaism, with very actual little actual um knowledge available, unfortunately. And so, yeah. When are you moving to Korea?
Sometime in around September, roughly.
Okay, so we have 9 months to get you ready to become chief. Well, so they've started calling Noahide leaders Nagid, which is literally means, well, it usually in the Bible gets translated as prince, but
I like that.
they've been trying to find they've been trying to find a good term for a Noahide rabbi who's not a rabbi, right? A Noahide teacher. I think some people have been using just the term teacher, a more, and I like that better than Nagid, although especially Nagid can be confused for a lot of other things in Hebrew. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is really, really interesting. And the fact that as my channel has grown, like the fact Antonio considers himself a Noahide is amazing to me, because while I had heard of the concept and I probably know about the concept better than 99.9% of Jews out there, um, it's I never really thought that I would meet a Noahide, and um, meeting Antonio has been a certainly a real blessing in my life, and he claims it's been a blessing in his life, and I hope that's true. Um, and over the past few weeks, I've spoken to more and more people like you who are uh, genuine Noahides or close to it or something similar. And it's you know it's a really surprising thing, because a lot of people will say, well, of course you're Jewish, you were born Jewish, you were raised Jewish, so you're Jewish, right? And in a very real sense, while you are not part of a the Jewish people and you're not a Jew, you are a part of Israel. You are a part of the Jewish people, in the sense that you have quite clearly. I mean, the technical term in Judaism would have to be that you have a chelek, you have a portion in Olam Haba, in the world to come, and you have a portion in the God of Israel. So yeah, so Noah, who is a friend of mine from here in Los Angeles, mentions Rabbi Finley, who is not an Orthodox rabbi. I am not a friend of. I'm not a fan of. There are that. This is the thing. The number of Noahides are actually really growing a lot. Um, yeah, I mean, I could probably I should ask you some of the more hard questions that people ask, right? So what it was so funny. Somebody who is a friend of mine, I was mentioning that um Antonio is a Noahide and the whole thing with getting married, and I said, yeah, well, maybe, he can just he doesn't need a, like, if he can't get a Jew to do the wedding ceremony, he could get Paul Vanderklay or somebody else to, and he asked me quite seriously, like, what would that mean to him if he can't get a Jew, because he thought, like, that a Noahide should in some way reverence Jews. And a I have actually heard people say, Noahides worship Jews, and it's like, ooh, that is so wrong. And I'm sure you've seen some of the really, really horrible videos on YouTube, and the people who are anti-Noahides. Like there is actually a movement. Maybe I should pull this one up. Stop Noahidism. Uh, like there are actually like, well, I can't find it right now, but there are actual movements of people who are trying to stop the Noahide laws, right? And who believe that it's a sort of Jewish plot to enslave the Gentiles. So, why do you worship Jews, and why do you want to be a slave to the rabbis?
Well, now you could like okay, so part of this is that no Noahides don't worship Jews. Like
I'm glad you
there's
know that. Good.
yeah, that should be very clear. You can make snarky comments about about Christians because they worship a Jew named Jesus, but the the thing is, I understand that is a criticism that has been leveled. I think it's a very unfair one because yes, there are Noahides who think like there might be Noahides out there who think that like maybe there's something special about like better about Jews, but um, if you know your Tanakh and you know about what God says about the Jewish people, is that He never says they're better than anybody else. He just says they're the nation of priests, right? That the Jewish people are the ones who have the covenant, right? They are, it is in their text and it is in their experience that they had directly with God Himself, and that doesn't make them better. It doesn't like at all in any way. The Jews are human beings just like me, right? The the I understand there is like some like it can be a touchy subject because um, people are still a little concerned about like anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and like Nazism and all that kind of stuff. But if you know, like there can be you can level genuine criticism at the Jewish community for things like not properly uh, taking account of the Noahide movement, which is fundamentally started a Jewish movement. Like they would, if there were no Jews, there would be Noahide. There'd be no Noahides. So yeah, there is that element to it. Um, but at the same time, it's like the there is we have the same like for a rabbi, you have the same sort of like respect as you would like a priest or a monk, right? It just but the difference is that the rabbi is somebody who is very knowledgeable about your specific religious tradition and this side and what you really believe. That's it. Like that's the only like leg up that the rabbi has in that regard. Um, so like, and there is that like, people have like some, especially in the the jail chat, using Talmudic passages, specifically the one about Rabbi Elazar and how like everything he says is in accordance with God, and God like does so much things for him, but the other rabbis disagree, and so like the string runs backwards, and like all these types of things, and the heavens speak, proclaiming Rabbi Elazar uh,
I
to be
have a
right.
video. I have a video, The Ovens of Achnai. If somebody's interested, I've gone through all of it. But yes, I mean, yeah, that the rabbis don't actually care what God says, and yeah, that's a very common one. And frankly, when I went through that that part of the Talmud, it's a beautiful part of the Talmud. It really is, and so it's funny. Like I am perfectly willing to go through the ovens of Achnai part because it's so beautiful, and people who misunderstand it do it to their own detriment. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there, if you read your Tanakh, you should know that um, one of the things we say about God is that he is not makir panim. He is not somebody who recognizes faces, right? He is not somebody who turns judgments towards some people against others. He is perfectly just. And yeah, I mean, yes, Israel as a nation of priests, Mamlachet Kohanim, and it also says that Beni Bechori, my firstborn son, is Israel. Well, firstborn son, I think, is a very good way of putting it. Antonio, we've been discussing you this whole time, but the a firstborn son, right? I just think that's just so obviously historically true, right? That our Bible is the what was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. A majority of the world's people believe in um, believe in the God of Israel. And for a Christian, and even for a Muslim, I mean, if you seriously take the Quran seriously, but um, certainly for a Christian to argue that with me is just really funny because you like so I don't know if you've heard this joke. Um, it's a really bad one, but I kind of love it. There's a Catholic mother and a Jewish mother who are, you know, saying the Jewish mother is like, yeah, one of my sons is a lawyer and one of them is a doctor, and uh, the Catholic mother says, well, my son's a priest, and the Jewish mother says, a priest? What's a priest? Well, he could become a bishop. A bishop? What's a bishop? Well, he could become a pope. Pope? What's pope? What do you mean, what's a pope? Uh, what do you want him to be? God? And the Jewish mother says, one of our boys made it. I, yeah, I really hate that joke, but I also really love it. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's obviously a bad way of looking at Judaism and misunderstanding Judaism, but I don't envy you having to answer these questions because you are staking new territory that very few people have. You're walking a path that very few people have walked before. Um, but I also want to know, is there something exciting about that? Do you feel like, there's something that draws you by the fact that you are doing something very few people have done? And do you feel like there's something in the air, something calling you um, to some bigger uh, I don't know. Is being a Noahide itself also a calling, be like becoming a priest or deciding that you should become Jewish and become part of the Jewish people?
That's a good question. Now, personally, I don't like. I think some people could have a calling like that. Now, I don't think that I have, and that might come as a surprise to some of those people, considering how rare it is. But I think it's really because like perhaps some Christians will cringe at this, but I think it's because of the prophecy I think in Zechariah. that the Jew, the nations will grab the hem of a cloak of a Jew and say, teach us like God is with you. I think that is probably the best way I can like kind of sum it up, because it's it's not that like it's not, there is this like feeling, and of course like if you like nowadays there's been a lot of talk about like the Messiah, or like the end of the end of the world or whatever. Like there's been a lot of like talk about it. It's not just in Judaism, which has been there, especially if you listen to some of those like internet rabbis, but also like within Christianity and Islam as well. Like everyone's kind of been talking about this, and yeah, people have been talking about the end of the world for a long time. And I can't, I'm not going to sit here and say that the end of the world is near, but um, is this like that? It definitely feels like something is changing, because this is unthinkable 100 years ago, right? Like it is like this. There were no Noahides 100 years ago, and if they were in secret, and there'd be such a low number, because the world hadn't reached that point yet. Like now the West is de-Christianizing, and it's been on that trajectory for like 70 years almost at this point. It has opened up this world where like at first Europeans and Americans and Australians were looking to the east, like to the full east, and going to like Buddhism and Hinduism and these type of like Eastern spiritualities, um, to kind of like fulfill the place where Christianity had left. And now more people are starting to think, well, there is the other option, right? Like Judaism. Like everybody knows Jews exist. Like they're the people doing their own thing that everybody knows exists, and people are starting to finally wonder what they're doing. And there are people who, and this is why I just find it's just so silly about the whole like anti-Semitism, like Jews are going to control the world and stuff, because they're broadcasting everything they're doing online. Like you can go online and watch a live synagogue. You can go online and like talk to every variety of Jew on the planet, right? Like there's no like yeah, like Hasidics are very can be a quite enclosed group, but like even that is changing, and you're getting some of these like videos like we just talked about, going into Hasidic communities, and then like discovering that they really have like these very like rich traditions, and they have a beautiful community, despite the fact that they can be quite scary looking to an outsider. And that is definitely a different time that we're in, that just wasn't possible 100 years ago. And I think also partly due to that is the availability also to have access to Jewish thought, right? So like I don't like there's Sefaria, and there's the Chabad website where you can get the Jewish translations of the Tanakh, and with Sefaria you obviously can get a lot more, and that is just like unprecedented. Like if you like the except for the Talmud being abridged and translated into Korean, it's like most most people have like no idea what it is, let alone what it says. And then you get a whole bunch of like you get polemics from like Christians and stuff saying like it's evil and it's a work of Satan and it has all these evil things in it, especially about Jesus. So there's a lot of like that, because when that's the thing, right? When Christians bring up these types of arguments, because now they have to deal with Judaism much more upfront than they've ever had to do before. And partly it's their own creation, because they decided to move into, say, Israel. And, depending, like, whatever your views are on, I know you're not exactly the biggest, despite what some of the people will call you a Zionist, even though they're not.
It's just funny to me when people call me a Zionist. It's like, you obviously don't listen to anything I say.
Yeah. So like Israel has a lot of Orthodox Jews, and it's a very big place for conversion, by Christians who have this idea that you need to convert the Jews, which is a fairly large minority in America, and they have the Jews for Jew. I think the Jew. Honestly, I think maybe Rabbi Spurback said this, or perhaps Toby Singer. But Jews for Jesus has done more for Judaism than like so many other. They really like Jews have done themselves in terms of like outreach to Gentiles, because
Yes.
the Jews, the Christians encounter the pushback that the rabbis and other learned Jews put forward, and then they broadcast it, and then other people like Gentiles like me who've never heard it, they hear these being spoken about by. It's like the way I like to think about it is how we know about some of the heretics of Christianity through people like Origen who quote them, and then you get like a revivalist movement in the modern times of like people of like Gnostic sects because they've like been revived through reading Origin. And this is like the same sort of thing. It's like people wouldn't know about these arguments, or they wouldn't be as popular if Christians weren't amplifying them by trying to refute them. So
Yeah.
you can say that like in this way that there's a like you want to think. I tend to think about it almost like a like it's going down a specific path that was almost planned this way, because Christianity, like Christianity is the world's biggest religion, Islam the second, and Christianity is in this place where, at least in the West, where it's um, people don't people are familiar with it enough to know that Judaism exists, and that Christianity claims to be fulfillment of it, um, and that it can be, so just that it is enough, like I guess you could call it like groundwork, or like uh, for this like build up that is very possible. And I don't see the world like, I don't like, just to be clear, I don't see the world converting to Noahidism. I don't see it becoming the world's biggest religion without the Messiah or something like that.
Give it
But
time. Give it time.
but I do see Noahidism as playing a specific role in people who um, have fallen out of Christianity, or maybe never really believed it to begin with, and they're still looking for the Bible. Because if you listen to like Jordan Peterson, and I know you're a big fan of his, and like Jordan Peterson seems like he's a Christian in a lot of ways, but he amplifies the Bible as well to young men and women who need to hear that. And yes, they get drawn to Christianity because that's their worldview, and that's the Christian West. That's what they know. But I think that Jordan Peterson, especially if he speaks to rabbis, which he, as far as I'm aware, he hasn't, at least, like, um, at least publicly. And I wish he would have spoken to Rabbi Sachs when he was alive, because Rabbi Sachs, I've read one of his books and I've listened to many of his lectures, and he was an amazing speaker, and all that. So that would have been a great conversation. But there's still plenty of great rabbis out there whom Jordan Peterson could speak to, and that would also help make these connections. So I do think I do think there was like, I think it was Maimonides who said that he saw that Christianity and Islam was a vehicle that God is using to spread Torah, and go around the world. And I think that's fairly accurate. Because like, if you really read the Tanakh, it does seem like it almost seems to be going that it almost seems like it's knowing that's going to happen, right? Like one of the things that really spoke to me was like when I was engaging with Muslims for the first time, and they were telling me about Genesis 17 and about Ishmael being given a covenant, and how he would become a great nation. And when I heard that, the exact opposite of what the Muslim wanted came into my mind. I'm like, this is a prophecy that's in the Bible about this, and the great nation is similar language used, Isaac. Um, so like, who would have thought that the Arabs would ever become a great nation. Like this is unthinkable. Like 2,000 years ago, they were just nomads. Like no, they're like the you know like wandering like Tibetans or something like that. Like nobody paid attention to them at all. And for them for Genesis to predict that and to say that Ishmael is going to be a great nation, I think is a very astounding prophecy um, in this world that really resonates in that direction. Since Islam is um, the Abrahamic faith, and it does have a lot of these elements with it. And I think it's also an issue. Like I don't know if it's an issue with Christianity, but I feel like there could be some like issues with this in Christian theology. Um, and I don't really hear Christians talking about this really, unless they're trying to refute it and say like Ishmael didn't really have a covenant, or like it wasn't like anything like Isaac's or anything like that. Because like this is just like it's very astounding. Like how like I've heard other rabbis say that Muhammad was prophet, and I'm not going to go that far and say he was a prophet, but there does seem to be something there that was the will of Hashem that
Yeah.
is manifesting itself there, and
Yeah.
Christianity is the same.
Yeah, I quote that part. It is from Maimonides, Laws of Kings and Wars, chapter 11. It's at the end of chapter 11 in an uncensored. Now, pretty much all the versions have it, but for many years it was censored. And where he says, and he wrote this almost 1,000 years ago, and it yeah, this is one of the things that when you pay attention to, like you said, that prophecy in Zechariah, right, that says that 10 men from each language will grab a Jew by the hem of his garment and say, we want to go with you, we have heard that God is with you. It's like, when you realize that that is a text that definitely predates Christianity, and in a very real sense seems to be prophesying what Christianity and Islam have done in the world, which is turn a majority of the world to look at this, supposedly ethnic religion. But when you look in Isaiah, it says, my house will be the house of prayer for all nations. And that, you know um, Israel will be a nation of priests, and that means a priests of to the other nations. And one thing Rabbi Skobach points out about the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, right? So Isaiah 53, the first line there is, "Who would have believed our report?" Right, and it talks about how everyone is going to be so shocked to find out who the suffering servant is. And Rabbi Skobach says, uh, I mean, what I think is a real slam dunk. If the suffering servant really is Jesus, nobody in the world would be surprised, right? It's like he is the one candidate that the Jews would be surprised at, but like nobody else. Whereas the meaning that we give it, which is the suffering servant, is ultimately Israel. And I do believe, Jesus as a part of Israel is, um, you know, I do believe, and it's not something a lot of people agree with me on, but it's nobody, I have yet to hear an argument that this is a belief outside of what is Orthodox Judaism, which is precisely like Maimonides says, that Jesus and Muhammad and Christianity and Islam were in fact used by God um, to make these prophecies, which are astounding, come true. And what is amazing is that in our lives we can look back at what 2000 years ago would have been insane prophecies to make, right? Like, even 100 years ago, the idea that Jerusalem would be the spiritual capital of the world, um, certainly 200 years ago, but even 100 years ago, that would be preposterous, right? There was Rome and there was Mecca. But um, if you're seriously, and in this little corner of the internet, what is our capital? There are people in Germany, and there are people all over the United States and Canada and Australia, and in a very real sense, what is the capital here? It is Jerusalem. And Jordan Peterson and all this stuff. And I had, watching his series, Dennis Prager, he's not an Orthodox Jew, but he's also not a Reform or conservative Jew. He is his own denomination. He's actually a very Protestant Jew, a lot like I am. But he, I was I was disappointed by his participation, because I think, like, if Rabbi Breitowitz had been around that table, he would have just knocked everybody's socks off. He really would have. I don't know if you've listened much to Rabbi Breitowitz, but he's just he's one of the few rabbis who will answer the questions that people ask. So there's that video about Noahides that's like that has like it has hundreds of thousands of views. It might even have like millions of views. I just remember seeing it, that it had a very large number of views, and it talks about how this idea of the laws of Noah are a Jewish idea of like enslaving people. And I think he actually, or maybe it was a different video. I forget which video it was, but one of these videos, which was asking really serious questions that a lot of rabbis run away from, went and asked Rabbi Breitowitz, and he answered them in ways I think few rabbis could. And so, yeah, I highly recommend him. Okay, we've been going for almost 2 hours. I'm willing to keep on going as long as you like, but I wanted to actually leave time for you to say anything that I didn't bring up, or if you had things you wanted to discuss. This is the first time you've gotten to speak to a genius of my caliber. So
Yeah, I guess like something that I am sort of curious about is with so one of the things that like I think appealed to me a lot towards Judaism, especially in the early part, was its idea that like almost like I don't like it's I feel like it's a little complicated for me because I'm not like I've it's not really talked about much, but the idea of it sort of being universalist in a way, um, like I understand like there's the Olam Haba and you've got in the world to come, um, and with the the 13 principles of minorities, you've got all these. Um, so my question really is like because as a like um, part of my criticism I had a lot of Christianity and Islam as well was the notion that there's salvation only in Jesus or in believing, Muhammad is Allah's messenger. Because I had and I know that and before people start yelling at me, I'm aware that the Universalists do exist in Christianity, and it's a very old tradition, right? Like Gregory of Nyssa being an example. But um, what caught my eye about Judaism was that it's orthodox, right? Like it's it's baked into Judaism as like in the religion in its entirety. And it makes sense from that point of view because like if Jews believed everyone was going to hell, like some people say, like I've heard some people, like both Christians and Muslims, say that. Like why would they not care about conversion? Like it would be a mystery. It'd be like you could justify your hatred to Jews if you believe that they thought everyone was going to go to hell for not believing in their religion, and they refused to convert people. And so that I found was a very stark contrast because I thought, like, how does this originate? Right? Like, how does the idea of eternal conscious torment um, and the suffering in hell by people who don't believe and unbelievers originate from a religion which, like, if you read the Tanakh, like hell isn't even really like mentioned. Like Sheol isn't. It's hard to call Sheol hell. It doesn't. It's not described as brimstone and fire. It's described more like a dwelling place for the dead. It's never. It's not like no one's complaining about going to Sheol and that's absolutely awful and you don't want to be there and you're gonna be punished there. Like this is not mentioned. So like I understand that probably this comes from like Second Temple period and all that, but the notion that um that there is no salvation in belief is a is important to me, because as I said, I'm going to Korea and I've had a lot of friends who are Korean and they know nothing. Like a lot of these people don't even know Christianity that well. Like despite Christianity being a very popular religion in South Korea, many of them don't know anything about Christianity and they don't know anything about Islam. Like they can't even spell Quran. Like these things are like, and not to say it's a bad thing. Like it's just the culture just doesn't have. It's just not that talked about, and it's not that widespread. It's the same thing in Japan, right? Like these like Abrahamic religions, like they only think of Christianity really, and even that is very loose. So I've always had that attachment, like why why is it in these in Christianity? A lot of people go on about that, and like as I said, the universalism the thing, but um, and I know like reading about it, that rabbis particularly don't talk about the afterlife that much, and it's really a focus. Like I think they say like the Torah is a book of life, and you should more about living here and now rather than whatever happens after you die. But I think for a lot of Noahides, especially those coming out of Christianity, it's an issue that like has been on my my heart, and that's why I think that for me that message in Judaism, it doesn't matter what you believe. Like we don't care we really don't care if you're if you're a Christian, you're not going to go to hell based on being a Christian. Like that doesn't make much sense. Um, and so basically, like my sort of question is a bit about where that fits in and how other people have spoken about it, because you might hear some people say like, oh, like part of the Noahide laws is to believe there's only one God, and like who exactly um, does that fit under? Is it self-proclaimed, self-identified Noahides? Does it include people who label as Noahides? Um, and like, what does it mean for the idolatrous people, like the Hindus or people who practice folk religions? Because, like I said, I've heard like some differing comments. Like I've heard some people say that it's permissible for Gentiles who like aren't Noahides to to be idolaters, and I've had other people say no, it's an absolute sin no matter who you are. these types of things. Like it's yeah, I'd like to hear your like thoughts on that.
Okay, so you asked a very good question. And despite my little joke about being a genius of my caliber, I'm not sure I'm a genius of the caliber to actually answer that question well, but I will give it a try. Because this is the type of question that well, Rabbi Malot, hopefully uh, if he's not still listening, he will probably make a much better video talking about this stuff, I hope. But you're hitting at something very, very important. Um, and it's a deep issue, and ultimately, it has to come from a genuine belief that there is one God who created the entire world. And the belief that God actually does rule the world. And when you realize that, when you truly believe that, then so the 13 principles of Jewish belief, these are important beliefs. And these are beliefs that God, in his grace and wisdom, has imparted upon the Jewish people in a way that we can be or legoim, we can be a light unto the nations. And throughout human history, people have been able to see the Jewish people as a light to turn towards. But we recognize that every single human being was created by God, right? And uh, I mean, um, is that where Antonio earlier said? Where was? Yeah, he said, "I don't question why don't you convert, because the question should be why would you convert? I was born a Gentile, not a Jew, right?" And ultimately, if you do believe that a kind, merciful, benevolent God actually created everyone and everything, right? Um, and so, for example, Krish is actually somebody else who considers himself a Noahide on our channel, on my Discord, and sometimes on the channel. He What he was most worried about, and the reason he could not accept Christianity or Islam, is because his parents are Hindu, and he loves his parents. His parents are good people, and he would not accept a religion that would tell him his parents are going to burn in hell forever. And that's a beautiful thing, right? Um, One of my favorite stories to tell is a man finds out that there is a fruit out there which tastes greater than anything he's ever tasted, and he goes in search of it, and he goes and asks wise men and hermits, and he goes from city to city, and he travels across oceans and mountains and rivers and plains and deserts, and finally he, after late in his life, right, towards old age, he arrives at this tree, and he takes a fruit and he eats it, and he says, yes, it was all worth it, right? um and a child walks up to the same tree and grabs a fruit and starts eating it. He turns to the child and he says, how could you, like, how did you get here at such a young age? It took me my entire life to find this tree. And the child says, I was born here. And part of that, of understanding that analogy, is understanding that the tree is Torah, and I was born at the foot of this tree. Okay. And anybody who was not born at the foot of this tree was still created by the same God, right? And God is not a tree standing still. God is infinitely far away from any human being. And all we can do is orient ourselves towards God and face towards God and move towards God. And yes, Israel and the Torah are a guiding light, or Legoim, a light onto the world. But wherever you are you are born where God put you. And He is just. He knows all. And so He's not going to damn some person who was born in rural Uttar Pradesh in India, or in on Sentinel Island, or in the middle of the Amazon. He's not going to damn them for not being, some scholar of Judaism or Christianity or Islam or any other thing. He is going to demand of them what they are capable of. There's a famous story of Reb Zusha, who was a great Hasidic Rebbe. He was the brother of the Rebbe Reb Melech, who was Rabbi Eli Melech of Lezhinsk, who was another great rabbi. And the story is told in different ways, but towards the end of his life, he was crying, and his students asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "I'm not worried that on the day of judgment they're going to ask me, why weren't you like Abraham? I wasn't born to be Abraham. They're not going to ask me, why weren't you like your brother, the Rebbe Reb Melech? They're going to ask me, why weren't you Zusha?" Right? And so there are some indications about God's justice in the Tanakh. But the fact is, our belief is that it is perfect justice. It is infinitely perfect justice and infinitely merciful justice. And so when the book of Job, ultimately, God answers Job and he says, "You don't know. You weren't there when I planted the world. You weren't there when I made the foundations of the earth, right? You can't understand this." That's God's kindness of bothering to try to explain to us. And I make the ant farm analogy a lot, right? So if there's an ant farm in the sun, and I move the ant farm out of the sun, how do I explain to those ants that by moving their house and possibly making everything shake and destroying everything they know, I am actually doing them the greatest kindness, because I am moving them away from certain death, right? And that, in fact, all the food they will ever find is food that I put in that ant farm, right? That how will those ants ever understand the truth of their situation? And how much more so by us, who are these finite, tiny beings, right? Who have an infinite God trying to help us understand what will never fit in this little brain of ours, right? And so you're asking a very fundamental and important question. And part of that answer has to be, we will never understand. And not until that day when the earth will be covered uh, with knowledge, the way the seas are covered with water. Um, but I mean, even in Genesis, when it talks about the other children of Abraham. So after Sarah dies, Abraham marries Keturah. Whether Keturah is Hagar or not, I won't go there, but he has other sons. And he gives those sons gifts and sends them to the lands of the east, right? And the Zohar says that the gifts he gave them were the names of Tuma, or the names of the impurity, right? And what the rabbis explain is the reason why China and India are filled with so much idolatry in a way that the rest of the world isn't, right? Is also in Genesis, because Abraham's Abraham sent those names with his children as gifts to the lands of the east. And that's a very hard thing to understand. Like, okay, what is God's plan in this? But obviously, if you believe in Hashem, you actually believe in one creator God, right? What gets me most upset about Paul of Tarsus, who I call jokingly and not jokingly Paul of Tarsus, when I read in Romans, he talks about the Gentiles being grafted in. And he talks about them being adopted into the house of God, right? My question is, whose children were they before they got adopted? Like, what are you saying? Which tree did they grow out of? If it's not the natural, like, if they're not natural branches, part of humanity, right? It and so a lot of these understandings, I would say, in Christianity and Islam, come from a very poor sense of monotheism. You know, this idea of Satan as the god of this world, or even a sort of dualism, right? That evil. Isaiah says, quoting God, I created light and darkness. I created good and evil. I am the Lord who created all of these things, right? He created the serpent. He created the darkness. And once you understand that, then the idea that God is going to reward me for being born under the tree and send Krish's parents to eternal damn fire because they were born in rural India as Hindus, it's blasphemous. It's completely blasphemous, right? To Of those to whom much has been given, much will be required, right? And it is a beautiful thing if somebody born into a Hindu family moves so far away from everything they have ever known that they arrive at the Torah. But that person has journeyed so much farther than I have, right? The fruit of that tree can never taste as sweet to that child as it does to that man who spent his entire life earning that fruit. He gets a gusto out of eating that fruit that, as somebody who was born under this tree, I I have to undertake my own adventure, right? I sometimes joke about like having to figure out a way of preparing the fruit so that it tastes even better, right? Because now that I am under this tree, right, and as a child, this is what I have, then in order for me to taste the richness of it, I need all that seasoning that the man who had to travel his whole life to get here um, got that I didn't. And we talk. I try to explain this in many different ways, and it might be the deepest and most important idea, which is the hero's journey, right? That descent into this world, into the darkness, in order to come back up and see the light. That is one of the most important things that we can understand, right? That our souls were with God, and He sent our souls into this world and into this finite body. And we have to get wherever we can. And when we get there, God isn't going to ask me why I wasn't Abraham or Krish's parents or you or anybody else, because He created me where He created me, and He gave me what He gave me, and He's going to ask me, why weren't you Jacob Federecci? And He's going to ask you, why weren't you everything Ryan could be? And it is the ultimate in blasphemy and idolatry and polytheism for me to say that if only I had been born Abraham or I had been born someone else, then I would have gotten where I needed to go. It's like, no, no, no. I was born where I was born, and I was given what I was given, and I have to make of that everything that I should. Um, and that's a hard thing for people to really grasp.
Yeah, the I really like that analogy with the tree because it it, it is really deep in that way, with deep symbology in that way, because I really do think that um, a lot of people have had, and just think about also the the people who came to Torah through, not like as Christians, like not just like the people who haven't even like people who aren't Noahide, who think Judaism is false, right? Like there was a lot of heartache to get Western Europe to become even Christian, right? Like it wasn't an easy process, and when you study the history of it, it was bloody and it was difficult. There were a lot of heresies. It was a mess, and it's always been a mess, and it's like they still haven't really figured things out with the Protestant Reformation and all that and all the schisms. So it there has always been a constant struggle towards getting closer to the Torah, and like yeah, like countries like China or like India, like people we don't know about it yet. But also we got to remember these countries are poor. They don't have access the same type of luxuries that we have in the West. Like us talking about this, um, on this live stream on a Wednesday, right? I should be out towing the field and doing all that stuff. But I have the luxury to be in this Western developed country as a university student, where I can have this time off, and I can discuss the really deep and important things in life with you and with many others from many different backgrounds and faiths on the internet, whereas a lot of other people don't have that, and it's really mind. I really do agree that to believe that God is the head of the universe, that he organizes everything. He's in control, right? because control is really like you can argue that human beings have free will and we can make our own choices, and that's definitely a part of it. But to think that God isn't like doesn't have a plan for the world in a specific direction, that human beings are um, trying to figure out, like we're over time we're sort of like progressing towards this end goal, maybe like, and I agree, without even realizing it. Like do you really think that Muhammad like like knew he was part of this prophetic tradition in Judaism? Like probably not. He probably didn't even know about the prophecy about Ishmael getting the covenant uh, from God. Like I don't think he was fully aware about the specifics. Like if you read a lot of the secular Quranic scholars, they think that this type of idea of this like Ishmaelite monotheism was already circling around the time, and people had sort of almost forgotten about its true its exact details that's in the Bible. Because as you might be aware, the Bible wasn't translated into Arabic until after Islam. So these people weren't aware of the details, and I think Muhammad is one of these guys, whether he was a prophet or not, whether you want to believe that or not, stumbled his way through, and he did the will of Hashem, whether he knew it or not. And we we are all doing the same, and that's why I have an issue with the idea of Satan being the prince of this world or the god of this world, because yeah, Christians could say maybe something along the lines of, well, we don't know why God allows it, but He does. Um, but it seems sort of contrary to think that there is a malevolent spirit who is very powerful, like extremely powerful, and that he can influence millions of people simultaneously, in very subtle and complicated ways, um, and that God isn't somehow in control of Satan and doing like, and that's why when you might hear Christians say like agree with the Jewish position, at least in Job, that Satan is the accuser. He's the one who puts like he's the like you could kind of say he's like the prosecutor, right? Because in every courtroom you need the defense and you need the prosecution. Satan is that prosecutor. He's not looking out to turn you into a devil. He's not interested in making you, lie and all that kind of thing. He's really there to get justice on behalf of God, right? To really put out your bad things, because you're not going to do it. Like who's willingly going to sit in the court and be like, oh yeah, I didn't do any, I did all these bad things, like I'm so bad. Like we're not going to do that. Like this is human nature. Like we're not going to admit all of our faults. We need somebody or something out there to get us to admit our faults. And to think that this Satan figure is manipulating people and that he's lying to people and he's sending people to hell. Like that is a very strange concept in of itself. Like, does God not have control of this? Does God want people to go to hell? These are questions that need to be answered, I think, in Christian theology. And yes, there are answers, and people. I'm not gonna say that this is what all Christians believe, and you can't the hopeful universalists and all that. But it is definitely a sort of theological problem I have about Satan, and Islam seemed to have inherited it from Christianity, um, and maybe like pre-Islamic folk beliefs about jinn. Um, yeah, the Satan controlling the world doesn't make much sense to me. Like I understand that human beings are evil, and we have earthquakes and we have tsunamis and we have all these bad things that we have to deal with as human beings and in living in this world. And the problem of evil is like some may ridicule it, but it is a very strong emotional thing. If not if you don't think it's a logical thing, which I don't think it really works, but it's definitely something that makes you very very emotional and empathetic towards people and their life, and it's hard to think that God isn't somehow um, knowing everything that's going on, and he's not in control, and he and while we don't know why innocent people suffer, and we can't, like you said, we don't know. We weren't there when the world was created. We don't know why Job had to suffer all these things only for God to be like, Job, you're right. The people, your friends, they're wrong. You didn't deserve it, but you're still going through all this pain. And Job, I'm pretty sure Job responds by saying like, I'm comforted, or like it's true, right? Like he's not he's not like losing his faith or anything. He's not breaking down over the the such evil that occurred to him in his life, despite him being righteous. And I actually listened to Rabbi Radowitz talk about Job recently, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. Um, so yeah, I the that sort of notion, because when you come into these type of things, people do feel like I still don't want to go to hell. Like even if I don't believe it 100%, like I'm still going to be a Christian because I don't want to go to hell. Right? Even if I'm convinced that universalism is true and that people aren't going to go to hell, or at least people aren't going to be tortured forever. Like I still like there's still people, and I've spoken to people like that who still remain Christian because they don't want to go to hell. And I think, and this is I guess also where you can put Toby Singer in, because he also says the same thing. Like hell is an evil doctrine, created by men to, as sort of like a tribalistic thing to keep you in my square. And I think it probably, like, my guess would be it originated in some sort of idea about like punishment in the afterlife, since
Well,
punishment is
we do believe that there is punishment and there is reward, but ultimately, I mean, you have to understand that within a context of the Bible is trying to explain something to us which it cannot explain explicitly in a way that a lot of fundamentalists want the exact definition. If you haven't read Maimonides, his introduction to the Mishnah, chapter 10 of Sanhedrin, it's called Perek Chelek, and his introduction there is where we get the 13 principles of Jewish faith, and it's a very fundamental text within Judaism. And he spends a very long time talking about the people who take things too literally, and they want things to be literal. So he makes fun of people who ask him, so after the resurrection of the dead, are like, where are people going to get socks and stuff like that? It's like when you're asking things that literally, right? And he gives an analogy. He says, when you have a little child, a 5-year-old kid, right, and you want to teach him his alphabet, you tell him, learn your alphabet and I'll give you a candy. And when he gets a little older, you tell him, get good grades in school and I'll give you $1, right? And he gets a little older and you say, oh, if you get good grades, I'll, buy you nice clothes. And, he gets a little older and he didn't say a car, but I'll get you a car, right? If you get good grades, right? And then you tell him, if you go to college, you'll get a good job and you'll be respected. And then he goes to college and he becomes a learned, mature person. And he looks back at his life and like everything that all of this learning gave him, and the idea that, the candy he got as a little child is worth anything to the riches that he has gotten from learning to read. I had a client. So a lot of my clients are immigrants, and I had a client, when she turned 65, she came to um, enroll in Medicare, and she was retiring. She had come to the United States as like age 15, spent the last 50 years working jobs, and she had just retired, and she told me that um, now, after her kids were grown and she was taking retirement, she had time to learn to read. And she had just learned how to read at age 65. And she told me she's just sitting there reading books after books. Like, she loves it so much. And, like, when I tell that story, it brings tears to my eyes, because I think of everything that I've had my entire life. Like, I learned to read as a little child, and you know, um, reading books. Like, I used to, I spent my teenage years like reading book after book, like Dostoevsky and Tolkien, and right, and Twain, and Edgar Allan Poe, and like, just imagining the fact that only at 65 she's been able to get this and appreciate it. And there's a very similar sense to people who um, don't don't really understand. No, it's not about hell and heaven. I was talking to this young man who was trying to convince me to become a Christian, and he apparently, this is a line the Protestants pull on a lot of people, which is, if you were to die today and God were to ask you, uh, like, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? And I said nothing. What would I say? And John Van Donk had a much better answer. He said, "Well, if God doesn't know, how the hell should I know?" Right? Like, the whole concept of having an answer to God asking you why you should get into heaven is in a very real sense just silly. But that leads a lot of people to say that, for example, Judaism doesn't believe in heaven and hell. It's like, no, that's also not true. We believe, like, so the the 13 principles of faith include the idea of a bodily resurrection. What that means and how that's going to be, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be, what my bodily resurrection is going to look like, especially since we also believe in reincarnation and how that works, right? Um so I don't know the particulars. And I do believe that God will, in fact, punish the evil and reward the good. And I don't know how he's going to do that. And that's a level of um, ambivalence and ambiguity that too many people aren't willing to live with, aren't willing. And honestly, it comes from not being willing to trust God. Um, and it's it's just really funny. The more I learn about Christianity, the more I am surprised by the things that I thought Christianity teaches, that I thought were the, you might call, improvements over Judaism, that unfortunately it seems to lack, like a true faith in God's sovereignty and God's goodness and God's justice and God's mercy, right? So a lot of Christians have this idea that their version of the Old Testament God, right, is the Old Testament God. And I realize this is a Marcionite heresy, and like the the more learned Christians will say that it's a misunderstanding. And to some extent, yeah, I realize that more knowledgeable Christians don't believe in a different God of the Old Testament and Jesus being kind. But ultimately, I don't know what you do with Paul of Tarsus's theology, where he has Jesus come into the world and somehow take a punishment upon himself. And like, how do you square these things with the fact that God has always been the God of the entire world? And God has always, and like, so then you end up with this predetermined Jesus that like existed before the creation of the world, yet for some reason, like, it wasn't clearly taught in the Jewish Bible. And like, Christians have this idea that Judaism is the truth viewed through a glass darkly, and you see it clearly once you look at the New Testament, the Christian Bible, and you see it more clearly. And frankly, I think it's so obvious that the opposite is true. That that Christianity has in fact prepared a lot of people who would have never been able to understand very, very important Jewish beliefs, right? Um, People who are just coming out of a completely idolatrous and a completely, polytheistic world are prepared by Christianity and Islam to come closer to what I think ultimately you see um, is the real truth that has always been there, and it's in the Torah. It's and yeah, like you said, when a Muslim, so uh, and Muslims are going to get mad at me, but like when a Muslim tells me their version, and it's not even clear that this was in the Quran, but their version that as opposed to Isaac being uh, bound by Abraham, that it was actually Ishmael that was bound by Abraham, right? This is the belief that they have, and like, and then they have this idea that like, so if you're not within Islam and the Ishmaelite tradition, that like, well, some Muslims do, and frankly, like, I don't want to straw man Islam, but when when you look at the Jewish context and the Hebrew Bible, our our belief has always been that the God of Israel is the God of the entire world. And that's all over the Bible. It's very, very clear. It's so clear that like, I keep on asking Paul Vanderklay, for example, like, so you have this idea of the Jewish Messiah which existed before Jesus, and Jesus came and redefined it. Well, what is that idea? Like, what is the idea that Jews got, and where did they get it, and what is it from, like, and who gave it to us, right? So like, you're telling me that the New Testament and Christianity and Jesus and Paul came to redefine the concept of Messiah. And it's like, well, why did they need to redefine the concept of Messiah why didn't God give us the correct concept of Messiah at the very beginning? And frankly, I think once he seriously engages with it, he has to come to the same conclusion that a lot of Christians did. Yes, Jews for Jesus is in fact where a lot of Noahides came to believe reject Christianity, is because when you come and you actually look at Judaism, you realize that there's no need to redefine the term Messiah. You just need to realize Jesus didn't meet the definition. That there was a very good definition of there is an actual definition of Messiah. There is an actual Judaism that is coherent, and all that happened was Jesus failed to live up to a very good understanding. And that's why there had to be a redefinition. And that redefinition is a ridiculous redefinition. The idea that, like, we believe the entire world is going to hell, it's just preposterous. It's not monotheistic, and it's never been. And so, yeah, I would love to steel man Christianity better, but ultimately I think it's obviously wrong. And the fact that there are now Noahides is kind of proof of that. And I mean, it seems to me that things are coming true in our lifetime in ways that certainly 20 years ago, it was a lot harder to see. And you're proof of that. You really are. And so I failed to destroy you with facts and logic. What can I tell you?
Well, I do think like part of that is the like Christian idea of like something is doesn't like the idea of self righteousness doesn't exist, right? Like the idea that you can't like you have to be you have to have like what I think they use the term like justification, right? Like um you need outside grace from God because you yourself are too lowly to like ever fulfill whatever it is. Like for example, like you hear, I think it was Paul, or I do call him Baal of Tarsus, who says that the law, was that you can never. The law was given so that you would know that you could never fulfill it, right? That you weren't perfect. That it was something given to the Jews that was a testament to show like you're not perfect and you need a savior, you need like something right to come later, that being Jesus. But of course the question remains like why didn't he say that, right? Like why doesn't when Moses was up there on Mount Sinai, he was there for 40 days, and like 40 days is a long time. Why didn't it ever occur to God to tell Moses, yes, but remember that these laws you can never keep them, and that someone else is going to come later to save you, and that these laws like don't even like that try, but like good luck, bro. Right? Like this is not ever mentioned in the Torah. In fact, the Psalms, and I think Rabbi Skobach talks about this, how he met a priest or like a monk. I think it was a monk, yeah, a monk who read the Psalms every day, and he's like, well, they're told to be so sweet and delicious, and it's like, why aren't we doing it, right? Like,
Yeah,
what's going on?
119, 119. So that, yeah, that he tells the story that he got called by a cloistered monk, right? Cloistered monks are people who just live in their cells. They don't, and he got called by a cloistered monk who wanted to convert to Judaism. And he's like, why? And he said because he reads the entirety of the book of Psalms every day, and Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the entire Bible, and it's 176 verses. It's an eightfold acrostic. So there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and there's 8 verses for each letter in the alphabet. and like it's all about how great the law is. I have to point out in Deuteronomy it does say that it is God who gives us the capacity to do good, and it is God who gives us the capacity to do good. But it is God through the light that is the Torah, that is His instruction, that He gives us that capacity to be better. And we are going to fall, and we are going to be imperfect, right? Like it says, I believe in Proverbs, the righteous man falls 7 times and gets back up, right? That's the righteous man. That's not the evil man. That's the righteous man. He falls 7 times and he gets back up, right? But yeah, there is an idea that I would say does come from Baal of Tarsus, which is that God just basically faked the Jews out. It's like gave them a something that's like not very good, and that's where you get the whole Gnostic idea of like, the that in fact um there's two gods, or the Marcionite idea, right? No, the the fact is the sweetness of the Torah amazes me on a regular basis. It really does. And its perfection, like one of the things that was most surprising to me is so the you talked about I think you earlier you were talking about creation and the idea that the creation of the world is proof that there is a God. And what was really really amazing to me was when I learned a section of the Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which talks about what's called the Omphalos hypothesis, or sometimes it's called last Thursdayism, right? And what I tell people is I would not be able to believe in Omphalos or any of these ideas about like the world being 5,783 years old if it wasn't so ingrained in Judaism that like 1,500 years ago, right? That it's in the Talmud, right? Or that the world was created betzivionam, in its fullness, right? Or there are a lot of other things like that. For example, Rashi talks about the Midrash, and he said this 1,000 years ago, that God is going to give the land of Israel to the Jewish people, and the Gentiles are going to come and say, "You stole it," and we're gonna say, "No, like God created the world and He gave it to us," right? And it's like that's not something we just came up with, like in the past 100 years when it's been a huge deal. Like it's 1,000 years old, this idea, and it like yeah, I mean, I guess I'm preaching to the choir. Obviously you seem to agree with me,
Mhm.
but um it seems really really obvious to me that when you look at what the Old Testament has to say about how the world is and how the world is going to turn out, it has been, in fact, validated by history. And when you look at certainly how Christian and Muslim scholars have understood their own texts up to now, and seriously, many of the things that I think they're trying very hard to explain away, including the fact that I believe the Quran says, the end times are imminent, and the New Testament says the end times. There are people who are alive today, and it's like, hey, when it comes down to it, take a serious look. And I think if you do take a serious look, um, you are in fact going, and this is the reason why there have been converts to Judaism all through our history, despite the fact that it's never been an easy thing um, to be a Jew. Uh, but what's the most crazy is um, seeing this, right? Seeing the Noahide movement of people who are like, yeah, the God of Israel is true. And just like the Tanakh always said, there will be people who are like, I don't, I don't want to be a part of Israel. I don't want, the full 613. I want to live my life as a Gentile. And it is the idea that we push people away, right? We tell people not to convert. That's a really, really surprising thing that comes from the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth, I mean, even the academics will tell you, is one of the earliest, is definitely pretty old. And it's certainly older than Christianity. And yeah, I mean, for me, that is one of the proofs, is because a religion that's everlasting will teach things that will always be true. And in a world where everyone knows the truth, there can be no great commission. There can be no um, necessity to go around and teach other people to know the truth, precisely like Jeremiah says. And this is the one thing that Christians skip over when they talk about the new covenant, right? Jeremiah 31:31, I think it is, right? It says, I will create a new covenant, or I would say renewed covenant, that no man shall teach another, saying no God. And like, that already completely, like, anytime a Christian has to come up to me and tell me that, know that Jesus is God, it's like, well, how can you tell me that this is the new covenant in Jeremiah? It's like, what are you talking about? Okay. We have 3 minutes, and then I am going to have to end this stream so that I can go and do some stuff before my Bible study in 15 minutes. And those 3 minutes are all yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been a good discussion. I have to say, like I guess one of my final thoughts on that is, as to like why I'm not converting to Judaism, to be a part of Israel is, and I think maybe Antonio will resonate with this as well. I was born a Gentile. I wasn't born a Jew, right? Like, yes, you can elect to go into Israel, but there is a purpose for Gentiles. Like you said, God is the creator of the world. Most of us are Gentiles. Like, it's just the way the world is, right? So there must be some role
And
for
the
us.
Torah says that. The Torah says Israel will always be the smallest nation.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't make any sense to say that they're a nation of priests and then they're the biggest. That's not true, right? Like, the priests are always a small community, and everybody else. Yeah, so yeah, Gentiles have a role to play in this world, and I think we've played a very important role in this world. Like, just think about the amazing inventions and thoughts and all these things Gentiles have produced, right? Like, the internet and all this amazing medical technology. Like, yes, Jews played parts in this, and there were genius, and there still are genius Jews who do amazing work in these fields. But a lot of this is Gentiles, and like that is something that we've got to understand. That, like, yes, we might not have a full religion and everything, and all the nooks and crannies and all this kind of stuff, but we have time. We can work with the rabbis, and we have a place in this magnificent world that God has created for all of us. And we just kind of need to realize it, right? It's all there. It's all for us to take. And you can't really like say like people are kind of hung up on the whole idea that Judaism, like everything is gonna be written down. It's like, well, no, like we've got to take our own initiative. We've got to take our own thoughts and our own ideas, and we can let Hashem guide us through the Torah, and we can live our lives by them. And like Australia recognizes the 7 universal Noahide laws. It's in our government, right? Like these universal Noahide laws are just the universal morals that we should all follow. And I think that's beautiful.
Beautiful. Shalom. I'm gonna end the podcast.
Shalom.